Hello and welcome to BBDD, or Beat Batters Dungeons and Dragons. Been a while since my last video, but finding time for shooting, editing and uploading is quite tricky. But as I'm sure we're all kind of finding out just at the minute, we have a lot more time at home, so I'm going to try and put it to good use. You remember all those tasks and projects that you had? Well, time to dust them off. We may as well come out the other side of this with something to show for it. Anyhow, today I'm going to talk about ambushes. No, I don't mean the kind of with orcs on a riverbank, I mean the DM kind. And by ambush, I mean those times when you're running a game and everything's going great, and then suddenly something happens that you didn't predict, or the players make a choice that you never imagined in a million years was going to happen, and you've just got to throw something together on the spot. Now, a lot of those times can kind of inspire some of the greatest moments in D&D, where you just kind of have to do mental gymnastics to come up with something on the spot and really pull something out of the bag. Definitely some of my best memories have been tied to those moments. But just as many good ones, there are the bad ones that leave you with that feeling of, that didn't quite go to plan, or I wish I'd done something else. And you kind of end up kicking yourself for a while afterwards. And I think these have happened so many times to me that I quite like to share a few ways that I'm starting to develop to try to armor myself against these ambushes and to try to avoid them from happening to serious extents in the future. I mean, they're still going to happen, but at least you can be armed and prepared for them. So as an example, I recently played a game where I was introducing two new players to D&D. I had two new players and then one experienced player, and I wanted to try and kind of give them a setting where they would be slowly let into the game system without being taxed too much, but also having a fun time. So I set it in Faerun in the Forgotten Realms, way up in the north near the Great Glacier, and basically the idea was I was just going to have them be part of a trek going up to a dig site on top of the glacier. And once they got to the dig site, that's where the real adventure would start. But I've started enough games at level 1 to know that basically level 1 heroes are made of rice paper and pretty much anything will kill them. So I wanted to give them a good chance of survival. So basically, to begin with, they were just going to get some diplomatic challenges, like dealing with ox herders and the other adventurers on the trip. Then they were going to have some skill challenges, kind of lifted from 4th edition, with thanks to Matt Coville's great videos about running the game, where he suggests using techniques from 4th edition for skill challenges and stuff to really enhance 5th edition. And then once they'd done that, they kind of reached the bottom of the glacier, climber up it, and then halfway up there'd be basically a 3-way choice where they could choose to climb up the glacier to try and get the rest of the 45 NPCs, just like ox handlers and things, up by dropping down an elevator, or they could walk along a wobbly bridge and try to shuffle the NPCs across that carefully, or go into an ominous cave. Now each path had different skill challenges and had different, they were all going to end up in some kind of combat of more or less degrees. But the cave one was going to be the heaviest combat, and the other two were just going to have a little bit, maybe some ice mephits were going to attack them. And I thought, whichever one they choose, I should be prepped. I've done a little bit of prep for it. I know what's going to come at them. I've got monster stats. Should be all fine. There'll be nothing too serious for a first level party, especially all 3 of them together. They should be fine. Now, who can guess what the players ended up doing when they were presented with these 3 choices? Yep, they split up the party. They had 3 players, so each one of them took one of the options. Now, I should have thought of this. I should have been aware that this was a potential, but I absolutely didn't see it coming. And I could have, as soon as they chose to do it, I could have panicked and railroaded them and had the NPCs complain until they said, no, we'll pick just one. But I don't really like to do that unless it's absolutely necessary. And I thought, well, I've got the stats for each challenge. Yeah, it could be fun. I'll split it up. I'll try and, give them a chance to each have their little moment. So each one of them has particular skills. And yeah, this could be cool, quite good fun. And then once they've done that, they could regroup, get the NPCs through, all three ways and it should be fine. Now, the problem, however, was that while I could easily alive adapt the challenge to suit just single characters, each one was going to take a lot of my attention, and the cave route in particular, which was the most combat heavy one, basically relied on there being three player characters to get through it. Now, obviously, it wasn't going to be deadly for them because I could adapt it live, and particularly the NPC, the player character who went in there I had within the group, within the trekking group that was going up this glacier, I had 5 potential fighters in the group to help out in combat because, again, first level characters. And so the player character knew the useful fighters and took them with him. So he was going to be fine. He was going to survive the encounter. But the problem is then it was going to turn into a really, really dull encounter. I mean, he was going to be facing like 10 or more zombies, and there was going to be just one player character and 5 NPCs, and I was going to be running rolling 15 times for every one of his, and nobody's going to enjoy playing through that. So it's lucky that he decided that he was going to take the NPC fighters with him, because that meant he was going to survive, but it wasn't going to be an entertaining encounter because I was going to have to be running all the NPCs I only had vague stats for. I was going to have to run all the monsters, and he was just had that one thing to do, the one player. And on top of all that, I was going to have to be jumping between the other players as well, because I didn't want to just do one after another, because that was going to be very dull for the other two. So I was trying to kind of cinematically jump between each player, getting them up to a cliffhanger moment, and then jumping to the next one, then cliffhanger moment, jumping to the next. Now, this is a technique that I've tried a number of times, and I'm still kind of getting good at. I know it can work. I've seen it done really well, and it can be a great way of doing things because you're keeping every player involved rather than just having a really long session with one player and all the other players sitting at the table just kind of looking at their phones and bored. It's quite good to keep them involved and jump them in between or have them do something during the game, so it's not just one person's focus. But I'm not perfect at it, and the fact that this had all happened without me expecting it to happen did kind of throw me off. Now, looking back on the prep and what happened, I had the time to figure out a number of interesting ways of what I could have done, which would have made the game so much better than it ended up being. But at the time, only a few simple ideas kind of came to me because I had too much to plan and too quickly, and I didn't give myself the time to prepare. So again, for example, in the cave combat, I knew that I couldn't roll 10 times for every one of the player. That wasn't good DMing. So I reduced the combat down dramatically immediately to basically just one roll each, one roll for the enemies, one roll for the allies, so that the battle actually had some tension. It was giving to the player character much more often so that he could actually feel like he was doing something. And while it did kind of work, it allowed the tension to keep there. I did have to drop a number of elements, and one of those things was I didn't really track the health of the NPCs or the hits they were taking, which meant that nobody got killed, nobody was lost. And after the game, after the adventure, the player characters were saying, it's lucky that none of the NPCs died in that fight. And I thought, yeah, I mean, yes, it is lucky. It's good, but it would have been actually quite a dramatic moment had their lives been on the line and had the player character had to choose between them living or dying, or have them as actual real allies that were taking hits within the fight. But unfortunately, that is just a part that I dropped. And then thinking back, because the player character had to focus on the puzzle, like in the encounter that I had, there were these 3 pillars which had evil energy inside them, and the player characters were supposed to notice this and destroy the pillars to stop the zombies from respawning. And the player character did figure this out real quick, but because I was running all the NPCs, I basically had to turn them into a shield around him that was pushing forward and backward whilst he sorted out the puzzle. And I was thinking about this after the game, and I realized what I could have done is, even if I hadn't had the stats to hand for the NPCs, which I should have done, I'll get onto later, what I could have done is I could have taken the stats for the player character. So I think he had something like 12 hit points and an AC of 16 or something like that. And I could have said, okay, I shall take those stats and I'll multiply them by 5. and then that would have been the pool of health and the AC of the group that he'd taken in. And then I could have just rolled once for the enemies, once for the pool of allies, and every hit would have reduced that pool health down, and every 12 that it would have gone down, that would have counted as one of the allies dying. That would have been a really simple, easy way of simplifying the combat down to just 2 rolls for me, and it would have also still kept the tension of potentially lost allies. Another thing I could have done is actually prepare the stats for the NPCs and give them to the player character so that he could run them. But since I didn't know that was going to be a solo encounter, I was expecting that to be 3 player characters fighting together. I hadn't done that because I hadn't thought it would be necessary. Now, I've learned that all combat encounters should definitely be player focused. So even if you're running like an entire battle, like a whole siege on a castle, everything should be focused around what the players are doing, even if they're just running across rooftops and leaping a gap. Whether they succeed or fail that check should change the flow of the battle elsewhere, so that you can narrate through the story how things are going depending on what they're doing. And it doesn't have to be made obvious, it just has to be player focused, because it is, in the end of the day, they are the ones that the story is circling around. And I did manage to do that to some extent by making this into more about him solving the puzzle whilst his allies defended him. But I did drop a few balls as well, and that kind of frustration lives with me after games, and I start thinking about how it could have gone better. My situation, and what I kind of do later, or did later, is, as I said before, have the NPC stats ready to hand, preferably printed out or written out, and just hand them to your players. If you're going to run a big fight and the NPCs are involved, you can just run them yourselves. You can simplify the combat so it's not as time demanding on your side. But what I've found really works, and I've actually had done for me in games where I've been a player, is the NPCs that are following along with the party are then handed to me so that I make choices for them, and that really helps bring me more into the story. I'm more involved in whether they live or die. I'm more engaged in that combat because I've got more to do, and the DM has much less on their plate. They can focus on running the monsters well and actually having a challenging fight with the player characters and the NPCs, rather than running like a million different things and rolling against yourself, which is of limited entertainment as a spectator sport. Other things that are really vital for prep is basically just, if you add any NPCs into your game, make sure you know what they can do. Anything that you can do to help you do that. There's a place I've talked about before, tetracube.com, which has a stat block generator, so you can make your own stat blocks or have copy stat blocks out from the monster manual or from the Kobold Press add-on manual, or just any other place that you find them. You can copy them in and then download them as an image and have them in a separate folder ready along with your notes, or print it out so that you can look at them and refer to them. So even if it's just something as simple as, okay, all these guys have the monster manual stats as guards, make sure you know that's the stats you're going to give them, and have those stats pre-prepped, pre-marked in your book, or just a note made in your notes so that you could quickly refer to them. Because then if they do get dragged into a fight, or if you do need to do a check against them to see whether they get convinced by a charisma roll or need to dodge a dexterity save, then you have the stats there ready to roll against, rather than just having to do it on the fly or panicking and just grabbing whatever you can get. So again, because I basically added, in my example, I added this group of, ended up being 45 or so NPCs, some of which have specific roles within the trek. Some were just adventurers, some were animal handlers, someone, I think, was a hunter or something, some dwarves and things like that. Because I'd added those in just for background colour, I hadn't fully fleshed out each one with a whole stat block or anything, and I hadn't really decided on what I was going to give them, because I didn't really expect them to get involved into the adventure all that much. And that's really kind of a rookie move. You've got to, if you create an NPC, do be aware that chances are that they're going to get involved somehow, particularly if the players then glob onto them and really want that NPC to be involved in their adventure. you might end up having to know all their abilities, all their skills, and it doesn't take that long to select a few NPCs from different resources that will allow you to quickly have those stats. Another great resource for that, in fact, is on DM Binder. You can find this, which is the NPC Stat Block Compendium Century Edition. It's a really great PDF. It has a bunch of stats for various player characters turned into monster stats. And they're all like human-like characters, or not specifically human, but humanoid. So they're basically just player classes turned into monster stats, which are really handy for fleshing out groups like this and adding a little bit of variance in there. And there's lots of modules out there, monster modules, that will have details like this. Volo's Guide to Monsters has a bunch more NPCs in there, which are all really handy stats to have knocking around just to refer to, just in case. So part of the pre-prep that I really do regularly now is just to, if I add any NPC into the game, I judge how likely they are to need stats, and if they do, or even if I just think they might do, I will make sure to have some kind of monster or NPC whose stats I can borrow to run as that, or some abilities that I can run for that. And the more you do it, the quicker you'll get at it, and the easier it becomes to pre-plan that just into everything. And that will cut down on a huge amount of times that you're going to get ambushed during games. Experience will basically arm you with lots of tools for quickly getting yourself out of most binds. Mostly this will be just relying on other times you've been ambushed, other times you've been not expecting a player to make a certain choice, or when you've realized you haven't done the proper prep for something and you've just had to throw something together. And the more times you get into those situations, the better you'll get at handling them, basically. And the best advice I can give you for that is just remember that the players are on your side, kind of. They want to have fun. They want to have a good time. They are with you to explore this adventure. And so just work with them. You're not fighting against them. You're trying to create a world with them. So just have fun with them. And they want to do cool things. So if you're struggling to mechanically work something out behind the scenes, it's fine to just slip something kind of cool in there, to just borrow from other media, borrow from books, from films, from TV, and just make it into something that is memorable and cool for its own thing. Even if it's not 100% mechanically sound, or if you're bending the rules a little bit, as long as you get through keeping the pace and the mood and keeping the fun, then I think most times players will be on your side for that, and you'll be able to get through to the other end and just kind of, you'll feel better about it rather than struggling through rules. So for example, during the cave fight, I could have stopped for 5 to 10 minutes and gone, okay, well, what are the stats for this, and kind of hunted around and how to kind of run that encounter. But instead I just kind of threw myself in, and I improvised on the spot, and I made the fight more cinematic than mechanical at that time, and it kind of worked. Like, it turned into more of the puzzle, because the encounter was supposed to be kind of a fight and a puzzle, where they had to figure out that the pillars were generating the zombies, and they were going to break the pillars, and then that would have finished off the encounter. And the focus was more on that part of it, the puzzle, than the combat, which is what it would have been had there been 3-player characters. It would have just been a fight, basically. But it turned out being more like that 1-player character having a really cool cinematic moment of bashing through the pillar and breaking the thing and using his paladin's powers to overcome the evil, whilst his allies were kind of a ring of defense around him. And I used description, I used cinematic events to make it more of a thing, whilst I struggled to get the mechanics to kind of keep up with what I was doing. And I think that's a better way to rely on if you've not really pre-prepped yourself and you're just thrown in at the deep end. Fall onto cinematics and fall onto just having fun and making it a cool moment, and then get through to where you have planned. I think that's probably your best bet. And the final point about kind of changing the way you look at the mechanics is, like, during my first obsessive year of D&D, where I just did nothing but D&D, I eventually got to a point where I kind of had this epiphany about the way 5th edition particularly is constructed. It's there to to try and translate a very free world into something that you can kind of work within. So you can do literally anything in Dungeons and Dragons, but if you were to have complete freedom, you wouldn't be able to, it wouldn't be as smooth. Like the DM particularly would be really struggling. The combat would be a complete mess. The way the system is designed is to allow you to take complete freedom and kind of filter it down and add a bit of surprise in there. And the stats and the settings for various different creatures and monsters and abilities, these are what allow you to basically construct and translate anything that you can imagine into a game. And if you get to a point where you understand the rules enough, where you just have a vague feeling of the rules and what they're trying to do, then you can play within them with a lot more freedom and relax a lot more. So you know that if you're trying to do anything like leaping across something or jumping on a horse to ride through a line of archers, you want to do a dexterity save, because dexterity is to do with those types of checks. And you need to know the hit points for something to know how strong it is. Like even the hit points of objects, for example, can allow adding some tension in. Like the pillars, for example, in my cave, they could have been just pillars that the player had to break, but by giving them a hit point value, then that gives them something to roll against. That gives them something to actually hit and do damage and to think about. And I actually also thought about them when I was thinking, okay, well, they're made of ice, so they're going to be vulnerable to fire. So if they thought about it a little bit more, they could have done more damage more quickly to avoid more zombies coming out by burning the pillars or heating them up in some way. And it's these little details allow you to translate complete freedom into something that is more playable and more entertaining, so that you can together construct a story. And I think having this sense of the rules, particularly in 5th edition, as a framework for translating a real world, will help you adapt more quickly and come up with new rules and new ideas on the fly. Because if you're completely stuck on like the core rules as the way to play, and you don't bend or break the rules, then that limits you when you have to. Because sometimes you really do have to, because when you're playing with players, they're going to come up with their own way of doing things and completely new ideas. And if you say no to any of these ideas, or no to too many of these ideas, then you're just going to kind of crush the life out of what makes D&D so great, which is that shared creative thing together of coming up with something new and figuring out a way of making it work within the rules, within the framework. The framework has to exist, but it isn't everything. And freedom has to be there, but it's also not everything. It's that tension between the two that really brings D&D to life. And I think those three things, pre-planning for certain, learning from your experience, and being able to really engage with the framework of the rules and to just have it as a core concept of how you approach this adventure, will allow you to adapt more quickly and to avoid future ambushes and have some really epic moments when you need to improvise on the spot. Well, that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope wherever you are happy, healthy, and having a great time. And remember, there are loads of resources online for playing D&D separately. So if you go to roll20.net, there's lots of games you can very quickly set up and learn the tool. It's a really cool tool, really easy to pick up. Lots of options and features, which you can either play advanced or very simply. You can also just use Facebook chat, to be honest, meet up with your friends, and yeah, so jump into an adventure and help bring us together whilst we're staying safely apart. So be well, I'll see you in the next video. Thank you so much for watching.